Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to this webinar that is dedicated to the introduction of the sixth call of the NAMA facility. We, that is the Technical Support Unit of the NAMA facility, or in short, TSU, are very pleased to see a high number of participants from all over the world who have registered and are now attending our webinar. We thank you all for joining us today and extend a very warm welcome to each of you. My name is Janka Claude. I'm the Deputy Head of the TSU and I have the pleasure to moderate today's webinar. This is the first out of two webinars that will provide you with information on the submission of project outlines for the sixth call. And the objective of today's webinar is to introduce you to the NAMA facility as such, and the sixth call, of course, the selection criteria and steps required to submit an outline. The sixth call was launched in December, and please keep in mind that the application deadline is rather soon, on the 15th of March. So on this slide, you can see our TSU colleagues who are involved in today's webinar. Starting from the left, we have Jose, followed by Natasha, Katarina, and Rita, and myself. Natasha and Katarina take care of the technical functioning of our webinar, and Rita, Jose, and again Katarina will also guide us through the content of this webinar. And in the end also will answer your questions during the Q&A sessions, while I will be moderating this webinar. Before we dive into the content of this webinar, let me hand over to Katarina to give you a quick introduction into the technical features of our webinar.
Thanks, Janka, and hello, everyone. First, I would like to provide a quick introduction to this webinar's control panel, which you can see here on the right of the PowerPoint slide. Feel free to follow along on the screen as I'll be walking you through using the mouse. Let's take a look at some of the control panel settings. First, you can hide the control panel using this button. Second, your mute status is located here. However, due to the high number of participants, we've placed everyone on mute and you will not be able to unmute yourself. Third, you can view the webinar in full screen using this button. This could be useful as the sessions will be accompanied by a presentation. And fourth, you can adjust the language of the control panel using the globe icon, which you will find on the top of the control panel. There's also a question tab where we ask that you submit any questions you may have throughout the session. To do so, open the questions tab and type your question in the window. We, the webinar hosts, will be the only ones who can see it, and we will answer the questions in the Q&A sessions after each section, so please submit them beforehand. In the event that there are more questions than we can answer today, we will make sure to answer those questions after the webinar and publish them on our website together with the recording of this webinar. And finally, in this webinar's presentation, there are several links to further sources of information. These will be available and working in the uploaded PDF of this presentation that we will publish together with a recording of the webinar. Back to Janka.
Thanks a lot, Katarina. So let's have a look at today's webinar's agenda. In a moment, I will provide you a short introduction to the NAMA facility, and then my colleague Jose will present in the next second part details on the six call processes and timeline. In the third part of today's webinar, Rita will introduce you to the assessment criteria that we apply in the selection process of the NAMA facility. And in the final fourth part, Katarina will guide you through the outline template for the sixth call. After each part, starting after the second part to the fourth part, we will have some time for Q&As. And please submit your questions via the question tab that was just introduced to you. Please submit any question that you might have, and we will try to make our best to answer this throughout the webinar or later on. So Now let's turn to the first part of today's agenda, where I will briefly introduce you to the NAMA facility. The NAMA facility supports developing countries and emerging economies in the implementation of their ambitious nationally appropriate mitigation actions, called NAMAs. These mitigation actions are to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in a certain sector. Supported NAMAs should have a specific reference to the nationally determined contributions, in short NDCs, under the Paris Agreement. Supported NAMAs should demonstrate that they are not only country-led and embedded in national development strategies and plans, but also that they are integrated into sector-wide programs and policies. For inducing a transformational change in the sector, which is very important to us, supported NAMAs should tackle a wider policy, regulatory, and other barriers that currently limit or constrain the investments into the low carbon development. Having said that, the NAMA facility provides support via the implementation of so-called NAMA support projects, or NSPs, which we usually refer to as the most ambitious part of an overarching sector-wide NAMA. It is thus important to stress that the NAMA facility does not have the financial capacities and resources to fund the implementation of a full NAMA as such. It is required that the NSP attracts also additional financial means from partner governments, from private banks or public banks, and private sources. As our support focuses on the implementation of mitigation actions, supported NAMAs have to realize mitigation actions and impacts within the project lifetime. Supported NAMAs should also demonstrate how they apply a financial mechanism that is able to attract additional public and private investments. They should work eventually to become self-sustaining in the medium and long term, and do not require any further funding from the NAMA facility, and usually also not from other donors. NSPs, or NAMA support projects, are selected in annual competitive bidding rounds, which we from the NAMA facility refer to as calls for NAMA support projects. The funding from the NAMA facility is provided to cover both financial and technical assistance measures within an NSP. Our NSPs have an implementation period between 3 and 5 years, and remember, we do expect that the mitigation actions are already taking place within that time frame. And the requested funding volume from the NAMA facility should be in the range of 5 to 20 million euro. Key requirements for the selection of individual NSPs are that the NAMAs are ready for implementation, to produce some mitigation, have a substantial mitigation potential, and that it can be ensured that the transformational change in the sector is induced. Later in this webinar, Rita will elaborate in much more detail on the selection criteria. So on this slide, you can see some facts and figures on the NAMA facility. The NAMA facility is a multi-donor fund established in 2013 and by its founders, the German Federal Ministry of Environment and the British Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. The Danish Ministry of Climate and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well, the European Commission, have joined the NAMA facility in 2015 as additional donors. With the additional funding for the 6th call, the overall funding earmarked for the NAMA facility so far amounts to approximately 420 million euro for the 6 calls that we have been following up. While our donors take all strategic decisions, the NAMA facility is run on a daily basis by the TSU, so the Technical Support Unit, which functions as the facility's secretariat. As you might have noted by now, the TSU is also organizing the calls for NAMA support projects, and we are based in Berlin, from where we are speaking to you today. So far, the NAMA facility has implemented 5 calls, in total. Now we have started the 6th call. In the previous fifth call, Our donors quite recently selected 7 new NAMA-support projects and availed funding for supporting the detailed preparation. Our current portfolio thus comprises 26 NAMA-support projects, which have been identified in the first 5 calls. And on this slide, you have an overview of our current portfolio of projects. Please feel free to also check out our website, where you have much more details on different projects and also some publications with stories from the project. You can see on the slide on this overview that we support NSPs across different countries and different sectors, from energy to agriculture, waste and transport. The portfolio reflects our message that while we do not have any sector or regional focus, our selection or the projects are selected and driven by ambition and feasibility. What that exactly means will be explained in part 3 by Rita. Now, most of you have probably joined this webinar to learn more about the 6th call of the NAMA facility. Some of you might have been present even in our website event at the COP24 in Katowice in Poland, when our donors renewed their steadfast commitment to the NAMA facility and gave a new commitment when announcing the 6th call. Our donors intend to commit up to 80 million euro in additional funding for this 6th call. As in the years before, that means all developing countries and countries with emerging economies are invited to submit NAMA support projects in the 6th call. And as in the previous calls, the selection will be based on ambition and feasibility. That is to say that, once again, there's no regional or sectoral focus in the 6th call. There's also good news for those who have been following the NAMA facility for quite some time now. In the 6th call, there's only a limited number of changes to the processes and documents compared to the 5th call, and we will flag these changes throughout the upcoming parts of the webinar so that you're aware of these changes. The TSU and donors continue to be committed to the guiding principles of simplified and clear documentation and a large circle of eligible applicants and enhanced support for the detailed preparation. However, we would like to stress one point. Our expectation level and the substance of requirements remains high, and the selection process remains rigorous. So we do, however, seek to provide as much as possible clarifications, documents, webinars, fact sheets, and other kinds of information to provide you with sufficient support and facilitate your successful submission to the NAMA facility. Now we will proceed to the second part of this webinar, which covers the 6 call processes and timeline presented by my colleague Jose. And after that next part, we will have a first Q&A session. Please remember, you can submit any question at any time through the question tab in the control panel. Now, please, Jose, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Janka. Before going into the details of the 6th call, I would like to remind you all that all the elements covered in today's webinar are also found in the General Information document of the NAMA facility. This document is a central source of information for a 6th call. Its purpose is to assist applicants in preparing and submitting NAMA support project proposals. We also provide French and Spanish translations. Since today we will keep it as concise as possible, please take a look as we cannot cover all the details in this webinar. You will find the links to all relevant documents at the end of the presentation. So, moving on, let's take a look at the overall processes and timeline of the 6th call of the NAMA facility. As observed, the process is sequenced, and each stage of the process is conducted by one of the respective actors labeled on the left-hand side. The arrow indicates the stage that we are currently in, the 6th call. As Janka mentioned, the 6th call was announced and launched by the donors at the past COP24 in Poland. The call is now open and will close on March 15 at 3 p.m. Central European Time. All the relevant documents for this stage are also available in the website of the NAMA facility. While the call is open, the Technical Support Unit of the NAMA facility conducts 2 webinars, the one of today and another in February. Clarifications notes will also be published. I will come back to this later. To begin with, national ministries and qualified legal entities are invited to prepare NAMA support projects, or NSPs, and submit their respective outlines no later than March 15, 2019. After the deadline, during the assessment of outlines stage, an external assessor team reviews the submitted outlines against a set of selection criteria. In the next part of the webinar, my colleague Rita will introduce the criteria applied to outlines. The Technical Support Unit undertakes a parallel assessment for double-checking, and observations by both parties are shared throughout the whole process. After this initial test assessment, a first shortlist of projects is decided by the board. At the same time, the board will also decide which projects should be further assessed in an in-depth assessment that may include a written round of clarifications with the shortlisted NSPs and potentially an on-site visit. Based on the final assessment results and recommendations, the donors of the NAMA facility decide on a final shortlist of projects. This is the first board decision. Applicants will be notified on this decision and are invited to further detail their NAMA support projects during the following stage, the detailed preparation phase, or DPP. The ultimate purpose of the DPP is to prepare a comprehensive and detailed proposal for NSP implementation. The NAMA facility provides financial support for this process. At the start of the DPP, a grant agreement is concluded. Here, I would like to stress 3 elements that are relevant. First, please note that the donor's decision to provide funding for the DPP does not mean that the project automatically receives funding for implementation. Second, the provisions of funding support for the DPP will be linked to the demonstration and satisfactory progress achieved with regard to crucial milestones. And third, the DPP has a total duration of up to 15 months from signing the grant agreement, and the final proposal can be submitted to the NAMA facility at the end of month 10 or month 15. After the DPP, proposals undergo a detailed assessment in the second assessment of proposal stage. Only the proposals that pass the assessment and show sufficient quality are recommended to the board. The board will eventually take a final funding decision for implementation in the second board decision. Following the financial approval and after concluding the respective grant agreements, the NSP starts its implementation, which lasts from 3 to 5 years. Implementation then is the final stage of the NAMA facility process. During the implementation phase, a close interaction between the TSU and the NSP continues. The NAMA facility understands itself as a learning hub. Thus, it wants to build up experiences on the financing of NAMA implementation and avail the lessons learned to a broader audience in the global climate community. I'll move on. A key question that you may have is who can actually submit an outline. The chart that you observe clarifies the different roles during the different phases previously described. Let us first look at the outline phase in the left side. Outlines for the sixth call can be submitted by a national ministry or a legal entity. If the applicant is a national ministry, this should be the ministry responsible for climate change and UNFCCC negotiations, or the national ministry in charge of the sector targeted by the NAMA. Moreover, national ministries should also identify a qualified legal entity as the applicant support partner for contracting the detailed preparation phase. This legal entity is required because the NAMA facility cannot directly channel its funding to a national ministry. On the other hand, if the applicant is a legal entity, it should demonstrate compliance with the capacity requirements and sufficient endorsements by the national government institutions relevant for project implementation. We would like to encourage you to have a look at section 5.1 of the General Information Document, where we have listed these formal capacity requirements for legal entities. However, let me give you some examples of legal entities that could be eligible. These include national, regional, or international development banks, United Nations agencies, NGOs and foundations, developing agencies, public utilities, public think tanks with a non-for-profit status, among others. I would like to mention that if one legal entity cannot fulfill all capacity requirements listed in the General Information Document, it may also consider forming a consortium with another entity or even several entities. In this case, it is very important to identify a lead partner and clearly delineate the roles of the partners in the consortium. So, in summary, outlines can be submitted by national ministries together with an applicant support partner, or by a qualified legal entity, alone or in a consortium. I'll move now to the detailed preparation phase. If the project is selected, the legal entity that submitted an outline or that acted as an applicant support partner during the outline phase will become the contracting partner that will receive the funds that the Manama facility provides to support the elaboration of a complete and detailed proposal. As I mentioned before, the ultimate result of the DPP phase is the development and submission of a fully fledged proposal for NAMA support project. Also, at the end of the DPP, the project is expected to be ready for implementation. This also means that the financial mechanism should be completely ready for implementation. All of this readiness that I just talked about should be demonstrated in a high quality, highly detailed proposal. In order to achieve this level of readiness, the Technical Support Unit offers additional support from an expert pool during the preparation phase, the so-called DPP expert pool. This DPP expert pool has been set up. Therefore, its services are immediately available from the beginning of the detailed preparation phase. This was done so that projects do not lose any time on the process of finding expertise. Applicants should also indicate in the outline submission their desire to use the service of the DPP expert pool. The main objective of this expert pool I just talked about is to support projects so that they can develop a sound financial mechanism and a consistent project design. In our experience, these have been areas where projects commonly struggle. Moreover, the legal entity that received the funds for the DPP should work very closely with the relevant national ministries and key implementing partners in the country, and with the legal entity foreseen to act as the NAMA Support Organization, or NSO. This NSO will become the contracting partner for implementation of the NAMA support project. I'll come back to this later. Now, once the final proposal is ready within the agreed time frame, it should be submitted to the NAMA facility by the NSO I just talked about. This leads us to the implementation phase. As I mentioned before, the NAMA Support Organization, or NSO, will become the contracting partner for project implementation if the final proposal is approved by the NAMA facility donors. Since we're talking about quite significant funding volumes in the range of 5 to 20 million euros granted from NAMA facility to a project, we apply more demanding capacity requirements to the NSO. These requirements are also listed in the General Information Document. However, we would like to stress that the NAMA facility does not disqualify any outline submission in the first outline phase for not proposing an NSO or proposing a non-eligible NSO. In these cases, a suitable NSO needs to be identified during the first 3 months of the DPP phase. Moreover, the NSO submits the proposal. It needs to demonstrate the full endorsement from relevant ministries. I would like to close this section with some further remarks. First, the Technical Support Unit will collect questions regarding this 6th call and publish clarification notes on our website. Please do not hesitate to submit your questions via email. As shown in the slide, we'll constantly publish clarification notes for these questions, and we also address them in our next webinar on the 13th of February. The TSU will provide clarifications with regard to the interpretation of the General Information Document and applications documents, but will not provide any NSP specific advice like on individual NSP concept or proposed structures. We do this so that a transparent and fair competitive call can happen. I would like to stop here and open the webinar for a Q&A session. I know this was a lot of information. Therefore, I would like to remind everyone that all of these can be also found in the general information document. Let me pass now the microphone to Janka.
Thank you very much, Jose, for this very comprehensive overview on the process and timeline. While we have been talking, we have received a number of questions from our participants, so I would like to pick up the first set of questions right now. So, for instance, Eduardo was wondering whether a project needs to be labeled as an NAMR in order to be eligible.
Thanks, Janka. Good question. No, this is absolutely not necessary. It could be also referred to as program, initiative, or any other term. The important part is not the name, but actually the content. The NAMA facility looks for mitigation projects that can trigger transformational change across the sector with strong country ownership and leadership. This is relevant. We're only covering mitigation projects and not adaptation ones.
Thank you for the clarification. Don't run away, Jose. We have some further questions here. For instance, Francesco is asking how many submissions we had received in previous calls and how many of these NSPs have been selected.
I wasn't running away. So in the fourth and the fifth call, actually, we received 75 and 76 outlines. So these amounts were submitted. Of 4 of these, 8 and 7 projects respectively have been selected for support for detailed preparation.
Okay, so approximately about 10 or 12% of the projects have been selected. Thank you for that.
Exactly.
Thank you for that. Another question refers to the status of the legal entity, and it reads, what kind of legal status should the legal entity have that is acting as an applicant or an applicant support partner?
So regarding the legal entity should be a public benefit organization. All applicants or applicant support partners need to demonstrate that the funds provided by the NAMA facility serve and will be spent in line with the public benefit purpose in the context of international cooperation for sustainable development. We want really to stress that the funding support granted by the NAMA facility may not provide an economic advantage to neither the legal entity nor any of the implementing partners.
Okay, thanks, Jose, for this one. Looking at the time, I will take one further question right now, and then maybe we get back also to these general questions on the process and timeline in the final Q&A session that we will have. A question from Rebecca from South Africa. You mentioned that the duration of the detailed preparation phase and the implementation phase 1 can you clarify whether there's a maximum of 5 years for the implementation phase includes also the DPP duration?
I think that this is a very good question. The answer is no. The duration of the DPP is on top and additional to the implementation period. That is, the 5 years actually start counting after the final proposal is approved and after the official kickoff of the implementation phase.
Okay, thank you for this, Jose. I would suggest that we move on for the sake of timing, but before handing over the microphone to Rita, let me quickly remind all of you that you can submit your questions anytime, of course, to the webinar through the question tab, and that there will be 2 further Q&A sessions during the webinar, and we will follow up on any open questions in writing in our upcoming clarification notes. So Rita, I hand things over to you to give us some details on the expectation level of the NAMA facility, or in other words, the assessment criteria in the 6th call.
Thank you, Janka, and hello to everyone. Similar to previous calls, once we receive the outlines, we apply a 2-stage assessment process. The first step is an eligibility check with mainly formal criteria. In particular, we draw your attention to the eligibility that applies to the applicant, as already outlined by Jose, as well as to 2 changes introduced in the 6th call. First, the duration of the DPP is limited to a maximum of 15 months, which is slightly shorter than in the previous 2 calls.
This is to signal that, while there is sufficient time and support for the detailed preparation, the NAMA facility expects a distinct level of readiness for implementation. At the same time, it underlines the NAMA facility's ambition to quickly deliver implementation finance. Second, the additionality of the NSP is from now on considered an eligibility criterion rather than a feasibility criterion. As a result, NSPs are not eligible for funding if they cannot demonstrate the additionality to previous, ongoing, and/or planned public and private interventions. While the additionality principle has been applied in all previous calls of the NAMA facility, it will no longer be assessed as part of the 50-point scale. Please note that non-eligibility may lead to the outline not being taken further in the assessment. The second step is a qualitative evaluation and scoring of the presented outlines. For this qualitative assessment, we apply two equally weighted assessment criteria, ambition and feasibility. Both criteria are scored with a maximum of 25 points, and both are composed of a number of sub-criteria. Ambition is composed of the two following sub-criteria: the potential for transformational change, the financial ambition, and the mitigation potential. Feasibility is composed of project rationale, project design, and the concept for the detailed preparation phase. On this slide, you can also see the rating we attach to these sub-criteria. The points represent the importance we attach to the different criteria. You can see, for example, that transformational change is our most important ambition criterion. Even more so when you consider that financial ambition is actually part of the transformational potential and that we address separately in order to give it a special focus. We attach a high importance to the NAMA support project design, rationale, and its technical and financial characteristics. Before looking at the sub-criteria in more detail, we will only highlight here certain key aspects. For a comprehensive list of details, please refer to the general information document and to the outline template with its guiding questions. Now, when looking at the ambition criteria, we would like to emphasize that the transformational potential is the raison d'être of the NAMA facility. There is no common definition of transformational change, but our interpretation includes a redirection of public and private funds towards GHG mitigations, a paradigm shift, meaning a significant change of technology or behavior, a rapid shift, meaning quicker than business as usual, an irreversible permanent change that means not slipping back to the situation before the project, as well as the political embeddedness and political will to regulate towards a low carbon development path. Detailed criteria are listed here as per the GID. Turning to the second ambition criterion, financial ambition, which can also be considered part of the transformational change. The NAMA facilities funds are limited and can only make a small contribution towards a sector transformation. Therefore, we would like to see a high leverage of public and private funds from the NAMA facilities contribution. In the NAMA facility portfolio, we observe a leveraging ratio of over 1:7 across those NSPs, meaning each euro of NAMA facility funding mobilizes an additional 7 euros of additional funding. It should be noted that the financial leverage should take into account factors such as the level of private sector engagement, nature of end users, the sector, and the country. The removal of market barriers and financial interventions to stimulate or discourage certain investments are also key factors. Do note that there is an intrinsic link between transformational change and financing mechanisms. We will not elaborate on this now, but would like to refer to our webinars on financial mechanisms that can be found on the NAMA facilities website. Detailed criteria are listed here as per the GID. As highlighted here, the contributions of other development financiers will no longer be a separate assessment criterion for the financial ambition. The reason is that additional donor contributions may not be relevant for all NSP financing structures, as some NSPs might be able to mobilize sufficient financial resources from private and national public budget sources. Additional donor contributions can continue to be a part of the overall financing scheme of an NSP, but it will not be awarded extra points in the ambition assessment. Even though we very much emphasize transformational change, the greenhouse gas mitigation potential is also very important to the NAMA facility. Ultimately, a low carbon trajectory can be demonstrated by lower emissions in tons of CO2 equivalent terms. We are very interested to get realistic and soundly calculated emission reduction estimates that do not have to be revised down substantially at the proposal stage. Please also consider so-called rebound effects in determining the mitigation potential of the NSP. This is particularly crucial for NSPs targeting energy efficiency. It is important to add that we do not only look for absolute level emission reductions, because otherwise only few countries and sectors would be eligible for NAMA facility funding. This means we also look at the overall mitigation potential of the country and the respective sector. Please note that, as highlighted here, applicants are also requested in the 6th call to submit a basic calculation of the GHG emission reductions as a mandatory annex to the outline. In order to provide you with further guidance on the mitigation potential, we would like to highlight a few aspects. First, what is expected is a conservative approach to the mitigation potential. So do be conservative when, for example, choosing and calculating the emission intensity factor. This is important as the NSP's success will be measured against its initial proposition throughout the assessment and implementation process. Second, do distinguish carefully between direct and indirect emissions. Direct GHG emission reductions are achieved through direct support by the NSP, whereas indirect GHG emission reductions will be realized through indirect benefits from the NSP. Now let's turn to the second general criterion, feasibility. Under this criterion, we critically assess the readiness of the proposed outline for implementation. Here, we refer both to the readiness of the financial mechanism, which should be operational within 1 year of the start of the implementation phase, and of the policy or regulatory reform. The diagram illustrates some of the factors to be taken into account when designing the appropriate financial instrument for the NSP. The phase-out concept is another important issue, which allows us to assess how the NSP achieves a permanent transformation effect after the NSP funding has ceased. Again, please make use of the lessons learned. In particular, we hope you will find our webinars on this topic useful. The first sub-criterion is the NSP rationale. An important factor here is a sound and plausible barrier analysis. The barriers can be found in many aspects. For example, they could be technological or on the regulation side. They could be in the financial instruments or in the interests or behaviors of the investors, be it companies or consumers. Having analyzed the barriers to transformational change, the next question is to what extent the proposed project tackles those. Maybe there are also other actors or programs in the sector that work on other important aspects, and one could create synergies. However, it is important that the project really faces and tackles the key barriers instead of working around them. To clarify what we mean, we do not want to work on minor or incremental aspects, but to facilitate significant policy and regulatory reform. We attach special importance to the risk analysis, including mitigation measures, and the indicators that allow us to verify that the project is on track and if it is likely that the ambitious goals will be reached. Our second feasibility sub-criterion is the NSP design, which has the most marks accorded to it, 13. This should address how exactly the NSP, including regulatory measures, financial mechanisms, technology shifts, and capacity building, plans to tackle the key barriers and achieve the transformational change in the sector. There are various important aspects involved. An appropriate institutional setup that brings the relevant actors on board and considers also negatively affected stakeholders, for example, waste pickers in a waste project or individual taxi drivers in an urban transport project. Technologies must be feasible and tested in the country or region. Experience has shown that technological pilots tend to score poorly here. The business models at investment level must be plausible. It means it needs to be demonstrated that the private sector or the end users that are to change their behavior or invest in a new technology are sufficiently incentivized to take the risk and or accept the high cost of the low carbon investment. The financing mechanism must be adequate in order to provide sufficient incentive to the market participants, but also to efficiently use limited NAMA facility funding. Please note that, as highlighted here, applicants are also requested in the sixth call to submit the basic calculation of the proposed business models and financing mechanisms as annexes. This will support applicants in substantiating their NSP rationale and design, and at the same time facilitate a better understanding of the proposed financial ambition as well as feasibility of the NSP during the assessment process. The last feasibility criterion is the concept of the detailed preparation phase to allow NSP proponents to develop the concepts to be implementation ready. The DPP concept should also show that what can be done in-house and where additional expertise, such as financial competence, needs to be hired from external sources. We have already mentioned the availability of an expert pool. What we want to see in that is that the applicant has a clear understanding of the detailed activities for further project preparation. This includes the following aspects: adequate focus, comprehensiveness, adequacy of approach and methodology, realistic timeline, and appropriateness of requested funding for the detailed preparation phase. The detailed preparation phase concept will also be part of the in-depth assessment for those projects that passed the desk evaluation and were approved for an in-depth assessment by the donors. At this occasion, the DPP concept might be discussed and might also undergo an adjustment.
Whoa, Rita, thank you so much. This was a lot of information that you provided just now on the assessment criteria. And I'm pretty sure that some of the participants might want to revisit also our written information on that, because that is extremely, first of all, extremely important information. And yeah, as I said, very condensed presentation right now here. Just to remind our participants that you will have a chance also to revisit the full recording and presentation of this webinar that we will publish on our website within the next week. Now, we have received quite a few additional questions while Rita, you were talking. Let's take some time to discuss some of them before we move on to the last part concerning the outline template. So, regarding the ratio, the ratio regarding the emission reductions, so the emission reduction versus the NAMA facility funding provided, is there any limit or any ratio that the NSP needs to achieve?
No, Janka, no, that's not the case. We simply require the emission abatement cost to be cost effective and appropriate to the sector as well. And we do not have any benchmarks here, as it is very situation specific actually. So, for example, dependent on the sector, the country, or the regional context.
Okay, quite clear. Now, Rita, while you were speaking, Min from China is asking whether investments from end users, for instance, like households, would qualify as a private finance mobilized or leveraged?
Yes, definitely. This is in fact a very good example.
Okay. That was a very straightforward response. Thank you for that. And is it acceptable if the national government is fully involved and committed but cannot financially contribute and directly or likewise match the NAMA facility funding? For instance, it can only contribute with indirect funding and in-kind contributions and so on?
Actually, yes. In fact, the in-kind contributions may be counted. However, there is a still greater weight given to directly mobilized funds by governments, to public sector budgets, funds raised through taxes, grants, loans, guarantees, etc. So we'll take into account the country context in the assessment, of course, what the public funds concern, but also the development of the financial markets.
Okay, thank you. And then there was one question coming in on regional and cross-border projects. Are these eligible for funding in the sixth call? So could an NSP or a project that's submitted to us, can that work in several countries?
Yes, same as in previous calls, cross-border, but also regional contexts are not at all excluded from the funding. However, what we would like to see there is that for all the countries which are involved in the application, the political commitment, the readiness, the implementation structure, etc., would be shown. That would be assessed then as in the assessment process. And such a cross-border regional approach would need to have a common raison d'être. For instance, several small island states of a region may join forces within project in order to generate an eligible funding volume.
Okay, thank you very much for that one. One last question right now for with regard to how does the NAMA facility assess the scalability of an NSP in the context of transformational change? You just mentioned that, but can you elaborate a bit more?
Yeah, so basically what we do during the assessment process is that we check whether scaling up or replicability is foreseen at the national or even regional level. And we look specifically at if there are activities planned and/or financial mechanisms there which aim at scaling up or replication, because that would be really the elements that would support the assumption that an NSP can achieve impacts beyond the NSP boundaries.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rita. Now, for all this information, as we still have a last part to go for the NSP, and that covers the NSP outline template, I suggest to stop right here and move to part 4 of the webinar. There will be another final Q&A session thereafter when we will have a chance to pick up further questions that came in. So, Katharina, are you ready? Then please take the floor to provide an overview of the outline template.
Yeah, thanks, Janka. So let's take a look at the application documents section of the outline template and the required annexes. Now, it is important to note here that the general information document, short GID, the outline template and accompanying documents have undergone a revision for the 6th call. The outline template has a reduced light structure now. However, the NAMA facility's expectations on both readiness and ambition of NAMA support projects remain high. In a change from last year's call, there are now 7 mandatory annexes you have to submit with the outline, including a basic calculation of the greenhouse gas emission reductions, as well as a basic calculation of the proposed business model and financing mechanisms. Furthermore, we suggest completed outlines to total no more than 10,000 words, or roughly 20 pages, excluding annexes. The first section of the outline document covers core information about NAMA support projects. It asks for information like duration, sectoral focus, and funding volume requests. In this section, the respective ministry that corresponds to the relevant sector should be identified, and a ministry contact person should be listed. We do expect that the outline submission has support from the ministry in charge of climate change and UNFCCC negotiations. And if this is not the ministry already identified as a primary ministry, it should also be identified under the section for a second national ministry, along with a relevant contact person. To be clear here, we expect endorsement letters from both ministries. We will cover that topic later when we discuss the mandatory annexes. In addition to the national ministries, central roles are given to the applicant support partner, the implementing partners, and the NAMA support organization. Let me take a quick look at the functions of the national ministries, applicant support partner, and implementing partners and their eligibility requirements. As Jose explained earlier in this webinar, the applicant support partner acts as the contracting partner for the detailed preparation phase and is a legal entity that should have sufficient capacity and experience to ensure a sound, detailed preparation of the NSP. However, we want to stress that the applicant support partner does not necessarily need to have the capacities and experience necessary for project implementation. The applicant support partner must fulfill a set of capacity requirements that can be found in Chapter 5 of the General Information document and are summarized on this slide in box 1.4. These capacity requirements are much less stringent than those for the actual implementation's contracting partner. In short, the legal entity serving as applicant or applicant support partner, as we call it, can be different from the legal entity designated as the NAMA support organization for NSP implementation. Another important role is that of the main implementing partners. These are key national actors, in addition to the previously mentioned national ministries involved also in the NAMA support project implementation process. Implementing partners are existing entities with specific mandates and are expected to possess relevant experience for the implementation and operation of the NAMA. I will jump now to the NAMA Support Organization, or short NSO. The NSO will be the contracting partner for the NSP implementation phase. As mentioned, we apply more demanding eligibility criteria to the NAMA Support Organization. However, in the outline, we simply expect information indicating which institution is a designated NAMA Support Organization. This means that NSPs should demonstrate that they have an idea of who could be an appropriate NAMA support organization, but will not be disqualified in the outline phase for any reason related to the NAMA support organization selection. The NAMA support organization will actually be assessed and discussed during the detailed preparation phase. It is worth mentioning that the NAMA support organization cannot be a private for-profit institution, and it does need to fulfill the capacity criteria specified in Chapter 5 of the General Information document. Finally, please keep in mind that an implementing partner and the NAMA support organization might be the same. Now let's move on to Section 2. The first part of this section provides space for a general introduction of the proposed project rationale, along with the inclusion of a barrier analysis, which involves articulating challenges that prevent a sector-wide transformation of GHG emissions. The questions and text in the section are presented in a way that supports the applicant in the development of a well-detailed project description. On the left of the slide, you can see links to helpful tools and documents that we have already uploaded on our website. You will be able to click on these once we share this presentation today with you right after this webinar. We strongly encourage that you review this information and tools to prepare the outline submission. It's also important to note that in the section you need to provide details surrounding the kind of technology and the business model proposed for the NSP. As my colleague Rita mentioned earlier on, we consider a convincing business model that incorporates the proposed technologies crucial to the broader impacts of NSPs. In previous calls, many outline submissions failed to deliver adequate data in this section. Please be sure to provide a well-thought model supported by strong data. The technology and business model are important in building up to the identification and introduction of the proper financial support mechanism. Once again, we would like to stress that a sound financial mechanism is in fact a central piece and should be presented as clearly and detailed as possible. The NAMA facility focuses on enabling transformative investments, not on technical assistance. The business model and financial mechanism should be further detailed in Annex 7. Moreover, embeddedness is also a crucial element of an NSP. The NAMA facility considers NAMAs to be implementation vehicles for nationally determined contributions in the context of the Paris Agreement. Therefore, the linkage of the NSP to the NDC is very important and should be clearly demonstrated. The last point I have here is that sustainable development is seen as an important driver for change. Therefore, in the section on embeddedness, please list and explain how the NAMA support project supports sustainable development in this specific national context. Section 3 is intended to present in detail the NSP's potential for transformational change, financial ambition, and mitigation potential. The difference between the direct and indirect mitigation potential should be described here and elaborated further in Annex 6. We strongly recommend considering the NAMA facilities monitoring and evaluation framework and tools provided by the NAMA facility. You can find these links on the left side of the slide once we circulate the presentation today, right after this webinar. Please note that there is a direct link between the financial ambition from private, public, and other donors, potentially, and the financing structure of the NSP. We will touch upon this in more detail now in the following section 4. Moving on to section 4 of the outline. Here, it is where we would expect to see the actual numbers of your financial ambition, in particular those that would be directly mobilized by the NSPs. In terms of funding, in general, the NAMA facility provides funding between 5 and 20 million euros. However, please note that for the NAMA facility's 6th call, like in the 5th call, the 5 to 20 million funding range is slightly flexible. In case you chose to deviate from the range of 5 to 20 million euros, please provide the rationale for any funding range deviation. Moreover, make sure that your cost structure includes your overhead, possible taxes and expenditures for monitoring, communication, and so on. Please also note that 1% of the requested NAMA facility funding for implementation shall be reserved for project evaluation. The evaluation budget will be centrally tendered and commissioned for all NSPs. Okay, so now that we've gone through the outline, let's also have a quick overview of the required annexes that should be submitted along with the outline. In Annex 1, we expect endorsement letters from the national ministries that we've already identified in the outline. We would like to stress that endorsement letters are much more than a formal requirement. They give an idea of the level of political and possibly also financial commitment of the national political partners. The content of these letters is therefore carefully studied and considered during the assessment of the outline. Endorsement letters should be in English or at least accompanied by an English translation. The next annex, Annex 2, is the log frame. It is a planning instrument for project development. And we would like to stress the importance of consistency between the log frame and the main body of the outline. The log frame should show all relevant assumptions and risks for the project to reach its outputs, outcomes, and impacts. Indicators should refer to the NAMA facility's mandatory core and sector indicators and include respective target values. In Annex 3, you are then asked to provide information and references regarding the legal entity that serves as the applicant or applicant support partner, which is to become the contracting partner for the detailed preparation phase. This information will be used to assess whether the proposed applicant fulfills the capacity requirements. It is therefore very important that relevant references and information are provided. In Annex 4, the concept for the detailed preparation phase, or short DPP, should be presented. The detailed preparation phase concept should demonstrate a clear plan of how to develop a sound, detailed proposal, including the identification of questions and issues that remain unaddressed. It should also identify central stakeholders for the project preparation, as well as the resources and methods that are required. Note that the concept should include a budget and Gantt chart for the detailed preparation phase. Support for creating these two items are provided in the outline template. In Annex 5, you are asked to provide information and references on the NAMA support organization. Again, remember at this stage, the NSO selection is not necessarily fixed. The expectation here is simply general information about the chosen NSO, as can be seen on this slide. Please note that if the proposed applicant or applicant support partner, as we call them, and the NSO are the same legal entity, there is no need to complete Annex 5. Moving on to Annex 6, it provides space for the calculation of the project's mitigation potential, including assumed reductions from a business as usual baseline. Finally, in Annex 7, you can break down the connections between the project's business model and the features of the financial mechanism. This annex will enable a better elaboration of the suitable financial mechanism and an assessment of the project's economic viability. Furthermore, please note that this annex also provides space for a detailing of the project's phase-out concept, which begins at the end of the NAMA facilities implementation support period. The Excel file containing Annex 7 has 3 sheets in total. So that was the overview of the new outline templates annexes. You can find these templates on the NAMA facilities website under Call for Projects. The submission deadline is the 15th of March 2019, 3 p.m. Central European Time. Please submit the complete outline with all annexes in English to the NAMA facilities email address, which can be found on the website. And now, back to Janka.
Katharina, thank you so much for this very comprehensive introduction to the outline template. Now we do have the opportunity for a last round of questions before we conclude today's webinar. So let's pick up the first set of questions. So there's one question here, whether it is correct that there's possibility to submit an outline requesting a funding volume exceeding the 20 million, for example, 40 million?
Yeah, thanks, Janka, for this question. Yes, this is correct. However, we are expecting that the funding volume is around 5 to 20 million euros. Please note also that the NAMA facility does only have a certain amount of funding available for the 6th call. So a very big volume would, for example, in the range of what you have mentioned, is hence not really likely to receive funding from the NAMA facility.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And as for the participants of this webinar, I just recall that the donors have made available 80 million in total for the implementation of the 6th call. Okay, thank you for that. Could you please reconfirm, Katharina, when exactly do the applicants need to provide the information on the NAMA support organization?
Yeah, sure, Janka, that's an easy one. You should indicate your idea for the NSO in the outline already, but the final decision will only be required during the first 3 months of a potential detailed preparation phase.
Okay, thank you. So one question to your presentation also. What do we do if we do not have the detailed information on greenhouse gas mitigation potential at hand when we hand in the outline?
Yeah, thanks, Janka. The NAMA facility requires a detailed calculation of the mitigation potential. This information needs to be provided as an annex, and that is a very important requirement to us. You may wish to include further verification measures during the detailed preparation phase, but we would like to stress that actually, if the ambition in this field is decreasing significantly during the detailed preparation phase, it will lower your chances to receive then funding for the implementation phase. We therefore request that you submit the best data available at the outline stage already. We also encourage conservative calculations.
Okay, thank you, Katharina. To give you some rest, I will now pose questions to Rita. And Adisu from Ethiopia is asking whether they can he can receive any support to capacitate the country to meet the specific requirements of the NAMA facility. So, in other words, does the NAMA facility provide any funding support for the preparation of an NAMA support project and in the end, to that end, for the preparation of an outline?
Yeah, there is a quite clear answer to that. The NAMA facility does not provide funding support for the preparation of projects and outlines. However, the NAMA facility provides funding for the detailed preparation for those projects. So once they have been selected in the call, they can receive this funding.
Okay, thank you very much for this, Rita. And now to Tina's asking, and I would turn to Jose. Jose, can you say, is it possible to submit any questions after the last note of clarifications has been published? So you might recall, as Jose mentioned, that there is a regular publication of clarification notes for all the questions that we receive while the call is open.
Thanks, Janka. No, unfortunately, no. After the 6th of March, that's when we published the last clarification notes, we won't be able to answer any further questions.
Okay, that was a straightforward answer. 6th of March is the limit to, is the final, no, in fact, 5th of March would be the final date for you to pose any question to us. Another question from Amr, and I would pose that to Jose, to you again. Can an organization apply within two separate applications, so submitting two separate applications in the call?
And also here, the answer is also very straightforward. Yes, this is possible. As long as the requirements are completed and that's established in the general information document, yes, this is possible.
Okay, thank you for this very straightforward answer. Then what else do we have here? There is a question to Jose again. Is a participant is asking about the opportunities for the private sector to engage in the current call. Could you elaborate a bit on this one here?
Yeah, sure. So actually, private sector is quite common. We have experienced in the past that consultancies from the private sector are usually involved in several steps of the project cycle, in activities that goes like preparing NAMAs, in facilitating the development of NAMAs, or even formulating outlines. Actually, during the DPP and during the implementation of the NSPs, actually applicant support partners might also decide to engage several external service providers to work on specific tasks. As a rule, and I would like to emphasize on this, the legal entity contracted for the DPP or NSP implementation will conduct and oversee the tender process. On the TSU side, we are seeking private sector expertise for the assessment processes, for monitoring, evaluation tasks, communication tasks, and others.
Okay, thank you very much, Jose, for this one. Now we're really getting here into the question and answer modus, and I'm switching back to Katharina, who took a rest now, and I hope she can answer quick and straightforward, give us some straightforward answers. So there was one question. Can we submit additional annexes like studies or any additional documents that might be of interest to the NAMA facility when we submit our outline?
Well, yeah, that's a good one. We do not expect any additional documents, And we also cannot guarantee that these additional documents will be taken into account during the assessment of the NSP outlines, because there are limited capacities to review documents. But if possible, we would of course try to have a look at it at least. So yes, you're welcome to submit additional documents, but we cannot guarantee that we really read through all the material submitted.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, please be aware to the participants that the assessment process is we are working on a very big time constraint. So we have a very tight time schedule. So please provide us, if you choose to provide us any additional documents, make sure that it is concise, and we will not have the capacity to study a 100-page study during that stage of assessment. Another question to Katharina. We have, so one participant is asking, we already have a study on the mitigation potential. Can we submit this instead of the Annex 6?
Well, yes, you could do so if the study really covers all the aspects that are required to be covered and that we indicate in our annex. But again, here, please, if you do so, make sure that it's not like a 300 document, but that it's concise information that you submit.
Okay, thank you so much for this, Katharina. And one last question to you. Don't run away here. Can the applicant support partner or the NAMA support organization in fact be a consortium? And if yes, how should this be noted in the outline and in the DPP, so the detailed preparation phase?
Yeah, thanks for this question, Janka. That's also an easy one. Yes, it's possible that the applicant support partner or the NSO is a consortium, and you just indicate that in the respective fields and also in the annex. Just make sure that then you provide all the information for all consortium partners.
Okay, thank you, Katharina. And now, before we call it an end, one last session, or a couple of last questions to Rita. Rita, can you tell us, when the NAMA facility talks about NAMAs, and we know that the NAMA concept was developed in the pre-2020 concept, do you follow any formal definition? So are projects requested to really have like an officially recognized NAMA on hand?
Yeah, Janka, so there is no strict definition of NAMAs, and as Jose already mentioned earlier on, we also do not require a formal label on NAMAs that request support from the NAMA facility. So, but we do still have a couple of features that characterize NAMAs or mitigation actions that we are looking for, and that's actually some of the points you mentioned them in your introduction, such as being country-driven, being anchored in national development strategies and plans, striving to be sector-wide programs that are national in scope, and also that NAMAs should consist of a combination of policies and financial mechanisms.
Okay, thank you very much. And a related question to this previous question. Do NAMAs have to be registered with the UNFCCC NAMA registry? You know that there's a registry specifically for NAMAs?
Yeah, there's a very straightforward answer to that. No, that's not required, though countries with selected projects are encouraged to register and support that they receive from the NAMA facility.
Okay, thank you for that, Rita. And one last question that came in from Kat today. How much financial support would be provided for the DPP, so for the detailed preparation phase? And can this include travel costs for supporting partners?
Yeah, as far as guidance to the maximum is concerned, we do actually not have one, so we do not provide an explicit upper limit for the DPP. Nevertheless, it should be kept in mind that large budgets requested for the DPP rather have the tendency to make us believe that this is a project which is not yet ready for implementation. So it's really the appropriateness of the requested fundings we will have a look at. And as far as the travel costs are concerned, yes, if they're related to the DPP and the content of the DPP, that is something that can be included there.
Okay, thank you, Rita. That was a lot of information today. And as we are running short of time, we will not be in the position to respond to all the questions posed by the participants, but please be sure that we will follow up on every single question posed in the upcoming week when we publish our clarification notes, and we will inform you individually also on the clarification. So before concluding, let me just remind you of the central sources of information relevant for the sixth call. Aside from the already mentioned sixth call general information document, or GID as we call it, there are of course the application documents, which is a zip folder on our website. And please take note that there is also an FAQ and clarification notes document published. So the first round has been already published on the 10th of December, and it will be published in a monthly interval. As I mentioned before, the last one, or Rita mentioned it, the last one will be published on the 3rd of March, 6th of March, and the next upcoming one is published on 23rd of January, so pretty much after 1 week. Please also take note of that we have the M&E, or Monitoring and Evaluation Framework, published on our website, and that includes some very useful guidance and examples of our mandatory core indicators that Katharina was already mentioned. So you please be encouraged to take a look at this document as well. And last but not least, we strongly encourage you to visit our previous webinars. For instance, the financial mechanism webinar and the lessons learned from the previous fifth call that you will find on our website under the publication section. So now this is really the final slide for today's webinar, and we would like to conclude this webinar with which we would like to conclude this webinar. We do hope that we have provided you with some useful insights and information. And as I mentioned earlier, we will hold a second webinar on the sixth call on 13th of February, when we will dive into further details and also respond, of course, to your questions. You will receive a separate invite for this webinar, but of course you're already warmly welcome to join that. Last but not least, please keep in mind that the outline submission deadline is the 15th of March, 3 o'clock Berlin time, and you will be provided with a link to the documentation of this webinar via email as a follow-up to today's webinar. And for any more information on the NAMA facility, you're invited to register for the NAMA facility newsletter, and please, of course, also visit our website. At this occasion, thank you very much for your active participation, for all the questions that you posed. And we from the TSU, we wish you a pleasant day and are looking forward to your project proposals in the sixth call. Thank you and goodbye.